Hello, hello. We are live from Glasgow. Welcome to the Cities COP26 briefing, your daily digest of what's happening at COP, the Global Climate Conference. My name is Shauna Sylvester, and I'm the Executive Director of the SFU Morris J. Wosk Center for Dialogue and the convener of a group of Canadian cities that are focused on COP. I will be your host for this technical briefing, and immediately following this session, Jude Crasta will be introducing an exciting guest, Ambassador Patricia to our Fireside chat. Now it's November 10th, Transport Day at COP26, and there are conversations about mobility going on throughout Glasgow. We're also coming down to the final days of negotiations, and ministers are working day and night to iron out all the details. If you're watching Twitter, you'll also know there might be a big announcement from China and the US coming tonight. Today, I am joined by a colleague, the head of communications for the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, Marnie McGregor. And many of us know Marnie from her work in transportation in Metro Vancouver. She was the lead for transportation at the City of Vancouver, also worked on the referendum, also was a major player ensuring people could move during the Olympics. She's a strategic advisor for the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which we'll learn more about, and works from her home in Athens, Greece, and in Vancouver with mayors around the world working on climate change. Marnie, I really can't think of a better person who can help make sense of cities, COP transportation, and everything that's going on here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Thanks for having me. It's great to see familiar faces and meeting up in this part of the world at this big momentous time.
So I'm in a space where there's a lot of noise, so I may mute my camera or mute my noise just because there's so much ambient noise, but that's the nature of being amidst thousands in this space. And we've got this little corner where we can do our recordings from at COP in the Blue Zone, and it's great to be here. So I want to start, Marnie. You're with something called the Global Covenant of Mayors. Can you tell me what it is, or tell all of us what it is, and what's the role that it is playing here at COP?
Sure. So the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, otherwise known as GCOM, represents over 11,000 cities and local governments of all sizes around the world. It is the biggest alliance of city networks. It's a network of networks. So we have many partners that are key to part of GCOM, including ICLE, the local government, C40, UCLG, many others. And essentially what cities have done of all shapes and sizes, not just mega cities, by being part of a GCOM and a signatory to GCOM, they've identified a commitment to reduce their climate and carbon emissions by a significant level and report and be accountable for those reductions. So those signatories and the cities are committed, active, and into the implementation. So the Global Covenant is represented. I'm an advisor for the communication side. We have a big team across 14 covenants across the world, local, regional, national covenants. And we're just important to make sure that the message gets to national governments, which we're part of and we're hearing about today, of course, with the negotiations, that cities are a voice and cities are ready for action and they are taking action on the climate front. And this is where we come in to help with our partners make that message clear.
Wonderful. And I'm looking forward tomorrow. I think I'm going to join the Latin American and get to know some of the players.
That's one of the covenants. They're doing great work.
Yep. Which is wonderful. So I want to get a sense, you have worked globally for a number of years. I was in Paris with you as you were part of the COP team in Paris from Vancouver, Team Vancouver. And I want to get a sense from you looking at cities, at these kind of initiatives. What's changed for you over these few years?
So I would say, and I know, Shauna, when we were in Paris, thanks to the work of GCOM, C40, ICLE, and many others, FCM, it was really a burgeoning voice, I would say, in 2015, where cities have always been around. They're doing critical work. They're on the front lines of both the climate crisis, the pandemic, economic issues and equity issues. But this, I think what I've noticed is just the presence of over the last 6 years now, and that kind of coordination and level of the voice, the one voice. So GCOM cities represent over 1 billion people on the planet. And that is, those cities really do speak with one voice. And through all these city networks and a lot of the work that you and your team are doing, we're just seeing the kind of, ramping up of that message. And I think those voices are even louder than they were, and more consistent and more compelling because of the evidence of what we're seeing on the ground, on the front lines with, heat domes and towns like Lytton and other, climate resilience tragedies that we're all living through on a daily basis. So I think that's the urgency has really changed. And then the level of kind of coordination and voice being even louder to the commitments, the action, and to the national governments.
So today is Transportation Day. I mentioned that earlier, and I'm interested, you've spent years working on transportation issues. What do you think some of the key issues are, that relationship between transportation and climate? I want to get your sense of that relationship.
So we know from Metro Vancouver and all the hard work that so many of us did on the transit referendum and the sad outcome of that. But what's come out of that is the really impactful issue of mobility and how important it is for everyone nowadays. And we're seeing that just thinking today at COP here with the transit passes included in your delegate pass. And I remember back in the Olympic Games, you had your transit pass. That was revolutionary back then in 2010, that you had the transit pass included to walk, cycle, or transit to get to the venue. So I think that's really great to see. Mobility, active transportation, public transit, it's so critical to not only as a sector and the emissions that are need to be reduced, but just those choices and options for people to have mobility, to get to jobs or working from home or daycare or all sorts of different options. And I know today is Transport Day. C40 was part of a large number of events. There's a lot of discussion about, and I know Metro Vancouver and TransLink has been a leader in this, on the electrifying the bus fleets and how that can really be moving the needle. That's changed quite a bit in the last few years. South America has quite a bit of leadership in that area, and you might be hearing a bit about that tomorrow, Shauna, on your panel. So it continues to be a critical issue. Transit, despite the pandemic, people need to get to their jobs, and it's a very effective, efficient way to do so, reducing emissions, and it has a significant impact. So I think it's more important than ever, and I'm really glad that this was one of the days that they focused on this topic.
It was interesting. I just attended a session earlier today with our new Minister of Transportation, Omar Gadir, I think, I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly, where he announced, and I think that they were announcements that were in the most recent election platform around the commitments to electric vehicles, a number of announcements around supporting an 8 billion accelerator fund, over 500 million to really support battery work that's going on to really support electric vehicle infrastructure, that they increase their ambition in saying, by 2032, there will be only electric vehicles available for sale as new vehicles. So really indicating to industry, you've got a hard timeline. And I wonder, as we see the increase in vehicles, electric vehicles, what happens to cities in that situation? Is that a good thing? Is that what do we all think about more electric vehicles?
Well, I think they're definitely, I'm really impressed and happy to see the Canadian government and other governments taking the lead. And I can get into that a little bit with the Pacific Coast Collaborative and the work that former Mayor McGregor Robertson and I and others are doing with that leadership. And California and Washington and Oregon and British Columbia have been tremendous leaders for many, many years on that, from electric highways and the critical importance of shifting signaling to the market, making it more affordable for people. Having an electric car is much better than a gas or diesel car, of course, but I think we need to still address the issue of congestion and accessibility. And, you can't have just electric vehicles and congestion everywhere. I think that's where public transit and the kind of mixed modes come in. So I'm certainly not the engineer for transportation, but I do know that that these market signals and the commitments that the US and others have made, and that kind of collective and the incentives. I know Greece is doing some really great work in terms of affordability and incentives for people to buy their first electric vehicle, and much more smaller vehicles, more taking up less space. But I think it's all good. It's just, making sure that there's that balance and options for folks who, can't be cars everywhere.
Now, you mentioned the Pacific Coast Collaborative. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what kind of role are you playing here and in the future?
Sure. So the Pacific Coast Collaborative is a group that was started through the leadership of Governor Schwarzenegger at the time and Premier Gordon Campbell in British Columbia. And there are the leadership of the states, as I mentioned, Washington, Oregon, California, and British Columbia, and all the major cities, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, Oakland, and many others. And so it's the 5th largest economy in the world when you put together with California and all of that up and down the coast. And the commitment was really Governor Gordon Brown and others were the leaders in terms of the cooperation and the regional collaboration. So that activity is, I think, a model, and they've been doing some great events here at COP on the building industry, construction, embodied carbon, ocean acidification, food waste, we've got a great video. They're doing electric vehicle, the leadership that's been shown there, clean green jobs, green recovery. So the sort of commonalities and the shared commitments of these elected officials and governments, and they have elected official coordination and staff level coordination. So former Mayor McGregor Robertson and I are just supporting from kind of a advisory and communications perspective to help get the word out and just amplify the good work, because it is a regional model for regional collaboration and raising the bar kind of consistently between each other and sharing the Clean BC. I'm not sure if that's the exact title, but the Minister Heyman just announced that a week or so ago and did some great announcements at COP. Really great leadership, and that's the collaboration, I think, where people are like between it's a regional, but based on the economy, based on the coastline, based on the shared air and all of those assets. And I think it's a very effective global model.
My final question, and we've been focusing a little bit on the Pacific and on British Columbia because we both have been situated there. You've been situated there and come back every once in a while from Athens. But I want, if you could talk to cities across the country for a moment and just really look at, we're down to our final days at COP. When this global conference ends, what are you hoping will be the takeaway for mayors for Canada, but also globally? What is that big takeaway, and what's the work to do going forward?
So I'm hoping that the takeaway is that cities are part of the solution, that we are at the table and ready, willing, and able to be partnering with all levels of government, particularly national governments. I think the message about cities are part of the solution and can help countries and parties that are negotiating as we speak meet their targets. And cities are, the real opportunity, both economically, socially, from an equity perspective. So this is where the real action is, and that I think that would be the biggest takeaway and we've seen it in terms of last week with Mayor Eric Garcetti and Mayor Eric Khan with Sadiq Khan with C40. We saw it with Mike Bloomberg. He's one of the GCOM co-chairs, and Frans Timmermans from the European Commission. And those voices are there. I think that if we can see that actually show up in some of these, you mentioned the negotiations and some of the text and some of the actual outcomes of the impact and the role of cities. We obviously are not a party to the Paris Agreement, but the partnership and being sort of at the table as true partners. I think that outcome would be very, very important from a multi-level governance perspective. through this process that we know goes beyond this conference and the 5-year cycles of the national determined contributions. So all of that, I think there's so much work to be done. But why the people that we all work with at the city, on having worked in local government and people working on these issues with cities, really feel optimistic in that sense that cities have that real opportunity, and that would be a tremendous outcome. And I think the work that you are doing, focusing on Canadian cities, big cities of all sizes, are really stepping up to the plate, and that's really great to see that level of impact.
And of course, this work is going to be continuing. We've got a new government in Canada, as you probably know. Well, some might say it's not a new government, it's a continuation, but we have a new government. We've had really strong representation here at COP from cities. We've had our, the head of the Big City Mayors Caucus.
Mm-hmm.
We've had the head of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We've had other councillors that have led on the climate caucus within mayors, really being clear about that local action. And I want to say thank you for taking that Canadian perspective into the global community through GCOM, through the Pacific Coast Collaborative. Really appreciate all of the work that you and other Canadians are doing in that global sphere. And also that you have always retained that relationship at home. And so you're feeding us as well with that information. So thank you so much. It's great to see you. And good luck on these final days. I hope that we see all of the ways in which cities are showing up at home. I hope we see them show up in the text and recognition at COP itself. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for the great work. Keep up the energy levels, and 2 more days to go.
2 more days to go. Let's see if we all make it. Let's see if we get through those COVID tests. That's the part I'm worried about. Now, yes. I want you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marnie. I want you to stay tuned for the next part of our session and our briefing, and that is very excited. I am very excited to be watching as Jude Crasta introduces our new guest, our ambassador, Patricia Fuller. Over to you, Jude.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience members joining us from coast to coast. My name is Jude Crasta, and I am your host for our series of Fireside Chats throughout COP26 here in Glasgow, Scotland. We are coming to you live at 6:47 p.m. GMT, that is 10:47 a.m. Pacific, at the end of a very exciting 3rd day of the 2nd week of COP26. If anyone's following the news, as I am right now, my newsfeed is going crazy with the developments that are coming out. Hang on in a bit, we'll mention that. But before that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time for being with us here today, wherever you are. And we are very excited to be joined today by Patricia Fuller, Canada's Ambassador for Climate Change. Ambassador Fuller was appointed in June 2018. In previous roles, she served as Ambassador to Uruguay from 2004 to 2007, and to Chile from 2012 to 2015. Throughout her career, Ms. Fuller has specialized in trade and economic policy, as well as climate change and energy. She previously served as Director General of Economic Development at Global Affairs Canada. Her responsibilities have included the oversight of Canada's engagement with international financial institutions, as well as leadership for development assistance policy related to economic growth and governance. We're delighted to be joined with such a depth of expertise with us today. Good evening, Ambassador Fuller, and thank you for joining us. You're still muted.
Sorry. Good evening, Jude. How are you? Good to see you.
Not bad. It's wonderful to see you. Ambassador, I do have a lot of questions. Just before we get into those, I do want to acknowledge for our audience members who would be very interested in the news, but probably are not following it. We know the United States and China have issued a joint Glasgow Declaration right now, promising to work together and closely collaborate in the 2020s to work on methane reduction, decarbonization, and deforestation. So just for for everybody at home. There's some news to follow there on Twitter, wherever you get your news. And we're excited to keep following those events. But let's talk about COP26, Ambassador. We've taken a long road to get here, and we're of course grateful that you've been a ready partner with cities in COP26 as an initiative throughout this year. Looking back since the release of Canada's updated NDC, what are some of the major developments you've seen emerge as Canada has prepared for COP26?
Thanks, Jude. And just big hello to everybody who's listening in, and thanks for your interest in what's happening here in Glasgow. Well, I think the key development that we saw in the lead up to Glasgow was really an acceleration of ambition. And we have been pushing for ambition that is in line with the temperature goals that we're all pushing for here, and specifically to keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. So this is the call to keep 1.5 alive. And COP is it's a huge event, of course. There's thousands of people here. It's almost 7 o'clock at night and the place is still buzzing. And it's been that kind of a circus now for almost 2 weeks. But I think the point of that kind of big event is really to place pressure on actors to come forward with ambition. That is I guess you could say the magic of these types of events is that they push people to raise their ambition, and we certainly saw that in the lead up to COP over the past year, and with a lot of pushing from the UK presidency to have countries come forward with increased targets, and that's been very positive. But of course, there's still a gap in terms of the NDCs or targets that would put us in the range of 1.5 degrees. I think what we saw at COP last week and this week is a lot of coalitions forming around specific areas. These are sort of outside of the text of the Paris Agreement, but they are very valuable kinds of coalitions that form around specific goals, and that's helpful to pave the way for eventually for countries to come forward with greater ambition. And so, the Global Methane Pledge is one of those examples where we agreed collectively among the signatories to a reduction of 30% in methane emissions across sectors by 2030. So those types of things are very positive. I think that in the remaining couple of days here, it's around coming to some sort of decision in this UN context of consensus decision making around how the COP is concluded and the way forward on what are still going to be some gaps in terms of where we need to be to achieve our collective goals.
So yeah, absolutely. So now looking at it at the second week of COP26, we've seen the federal government just so busy on the ground here, meeting with different partners at the national, subnational levels, and with private and civil society actors. What would you highlight have been some of the major pushes or asks from the Canadian delegation at COP26?
Sure. Well, a couple. Maybe I'll give you 3 or 4, perhaps, shall I? Because there's been many that we've been working on. So when the Prime Minister was here, he had an important conversation with other key leaders around the value of carbon pricing and expanding the utilization of carbon pricing globally as a policy tool to achieve emission reductions. And so that, I think, will continue to be a focus for Canada. We're using this policy tool in Canada, and we believe it is the most efficient way to achieve emission reductions in a market-based way. So that certainly I think was a message that Canada was delivering very effectively in terms of that opportunity. Secondly, the transition away from coal has been something that Canada has been working on very hard over the past couple of years. We, as you know, lead the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is aimed at phasing out coal-fired electricity. And at COP26, we saw some more progress on that in terms of additional members to the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And we also, with our new pledge on assistance for developing countries, or what we call climate finance, Canada this past year doubled our pledge, and here at COP we committed that we would dedicate up to $1 billion of the $5.3 billion to the coal transition, to helping developing countries transition to clean energy from coal-fired electricity. So that was an important piece. We also, in relation to our climate finance pledge, committed to at least 40% of that being dedicated to supporting developing countries in adapting to climate change. And this is really responding to a key kind of request from developing countries that more of assistance from donors generally go towards the costs they're facing to adapt to climate change, because many of these countries are on the front lines of climate change and have certainly fewer resources than developed countries to pay the costs of building resilience and adapting to climate change. There's some areas that, well, we can talk about a little bit further. There was one I attended today around cities, but maybe I'll pass it back to you and we can come to that in a moment.
About adaptation here. When we're looking at the urgency for that working relationship with cities in addressing the needs that are now very visible from the climate emergency, what is it that the federal government is prioritizing in that working relationship with cities to support frontline adaptation?
Do you mean, Jude, with respect to what I was speaking about, our assistance to developing countries, or do you mean in Canada?
In Canada, yeah.
Okay. What I could mention there is that, of course, we have a lot of programs underway to assist partners with adaptation, and one we can mention is the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, which funds adaptation projects, and more recently, the federal government put in place a program for natural infrastructure, which I think is a very cost-effective approach to adaptation, and that's something that is a new program. But I think perhaps also important to note that the discussions on a national adaptation strategy are underway, and that is really with the goal of arriving at a clear set of priorities of where we do need to enhance collaboration among different levels of government. That's really the goal of the national adaptation strategy. So I think that's an important conversation for cities to be engaged in.
Mm-hmm. So let's discuss how cities can work closely with your role as ambassador in supporting your work in other countries around the world, especially with the Global South, an important partner in addressing climate change. What would you see as those top line areas where Canada's cities and local governments could provide that direct perspective or support to your role and your work?
Well, I think, the first thing is just by walking the talk, and of course cities have, many areas that are such important actors, and in the ways in which we do need to reduce emissions, and so I think being ambitious in your own plans and sharing that experience internationally is really the main way in which cities support the work that we do here at COP and across the board and in international efforts on climate change and in recognition of the important role cities play. Tomorrow is the day at COP, the theme day for cities, regions, and the built environment. We have theme days each day, and I think the fact that there's one dedicated to cities and regions is a recognition of the important role that cities play.
Absolutely.
So I think there's many areas in which cities work together internationally to support each other, and the one that I was referencing earlier that I attended a launch of today with the U.S. Department of Energy is the Twin Cities Initiative for Hydrogen. So it's the Hydrogen Twin Cities Initiative, which will enable the twinning of cities to work together to advance the implementation of hydrogen in city transportation systems or buildings or ports for port cities. So I think that's just one example of city-focused initiatives that are really great ways for ambitious cities to join together and do more by working together.
Absolutely. And that sounds really fascinating, and it comes out of this climate diplomacy that works across borders to address common challenges. So, in terms of how then Canada's cities could learn from other countries or in other jurisdictions, you've had a lot of engagements here at the pavilions in different events and with closed meetings. What would you say are some of the highlights of like a strong action you're seeing elsewhere that maybe we can bring to Canada and increase our own ambition?
Well, I'll hope to see some of those examples tomorrow, but I can think of so many examples where cities internationally and of course in Canada are doing really important things. Obviously, the transportation area is a key one where cities hold some of the key levers and the federal government is doing things to incent the adoption of electric vehicles. There's things that cities are doing around the world that can push that forward more. Here in the UK, we can think of what London does around access for cars to the city of London and the charge that is applied to all vehicles entering the city of London, unless it's an electric vehicle, in which case that charge is waived. So that's that kind of preferential kind of treatment of clean vehicles is one way that cities are acting on climate change, and I think there's many other examples. So I'm going to look forward to tomorrow to seeing some more of those new ones.
Absolutely. And so I was mentioning this to Carol Saab, CEO of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, yesterday. We listened to Secretary John Kerry talk about at the Bloomberg Summit about how nearly $2 to $3 trillion per year was needed globally to address climate mitigation and adaptation. And Canada has been a huge part of providing a lot of funding to different countries to support that. How do you think that national action that Canada is doing globally can translate down as examples, as success examples around the world that Canada cities can then emulate in how they are relating with their counterparts worldwide?
Well, maybe the area I would mention there is around how cities partner with the private sector, because when we talk about the trillions that are needed for infrastructure to adapt to climate change, the point is often made that not all of that can come from the public purse. It just governments don't have the scale of resources required in many cases. So there's a lot of innovative work going on around ways in which the private sector can come in and partner with governments to to do things that address climate change, including around infrastructure. So, and it's not easy to do that. You have to do it well. So I think that's a huge opportunity for learning from what works and what doesn't work in other contexts. So I really encourage cities in Canada that have found ways to do that effectively. Not just in the area of transport, but we could also think of the area of energy efficiency, where there's long-standing kind of practice of involving the private sector in energy saving programs, ESCOs as they're called. So ways in which we can bring the private sector in as an investor and provide some of the financing that's needed for those actions.
Absolutely. So I'm just taking a look at the chat, and one of our viewers has a question here. What are Canadian cities seeing as their role really in responding to the biodiversity crisis, whether domestically, globally? I've seen lots of newer focus on city climate change plans, but not so much on biodiversity plans or enhancing parks to help biodiversity. So bringing that to your expertise, looking at it from a federal perspective, how do you see that cities playing a role in biodiversity?
I think that's been one of the notable things at this COP. It's been an evolution, but I think more and more we're seeing the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis talked about together, and solutions that address both talked about. And the phrase there is nature-based solutions, and the advantage of those kinds of strategies is that they not only either sequester carbon or build resilience to climate change, but at the same time have biodiversity benefits. So coming back to Canada's climate finance pledge for assistance to developing countries, we've said that 20% of that will go to projects that have benefits for biodiversity. So those would be projects in that area of nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions. And we've seen great examples of that in Canada with cities that are, for example, protecting wetlands for their value in terms of absorption of stormwater. Coastal cities implementing solutions around coastal area protection with whether it's salt marshes or other kinds of natural ecosystems. Seagrass is another one. So that green infrastructure opportunity that I think is being recognized more and more for the potential it has, not just for addressing climate change, but also for those biodiversity and many other benefits, green spaces that are so important for citizens. And I should mention one other big one, which I know cities in Canada, Montreal, Toronto, and many others are implementing, and that's sort of green canopy kind of programs where the cooling effect of greater tree cover in cities is hugely positive for adaptation to climate change, and it's also beneficial to wildlife that joins us in our cityscapes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no kidding. I'm going to go quickly to another question we have coming from our viewers. We have from Angela Schwam. Many of the solutions to the problems of GHG emissions, and this is about just transitions and resource extraction. So some of those solutions come from technology that would require greater resource extraction, especially for rare minerals. The question here is, how can Canada ensure a just transition to renewable energies, whether locally or globally, while respecting the rights of the local communities where the resources are being extracted?
No, that's a great question, because certainly the clean energy transition does rest on critical minerals. All of the technologies, or many of them, in any case, electric vehicles and storage, battery storage in various scales, does involve usually critical minerals. And And there, I think that Canada's got a lot to offer in terms of experience of how communities are involved and how they need to be involved in projects in the kind of natural resources sectors. So I think that's that's an area where I often find that other countries are interested to hear about how we do that in Canada. How do Indigenous communities play their role and exercise their rights in these areas? How do we bring in multiple stakeholders as really partners in projects? I think it is a great question that's been asked, because I think that's an important area for the energy transition to get right. We know that there's going to be the need for those critical minerals, and right now many of them are, or most of them are being mined in areas where respect for human rights and the rights of communities is not necessarily respected. So I think that's an opportunity for Canada to think about how it can be part of the opportunity that this growth area represents, but also that we can be potentially a supplier that is recognized for developing this opportunity in a way that brings along the communities is one in which the communities in those locations are supportive of accessing that opportunity.
Absolutely. And so, Ambassador Fuller, we're just about at time. I do have one last question. You mentioned tomorrow being the Cities, Regions, and Built Environment Day. We are definitely very excited being the Cities and COP26 initiative. My question to you is, what would you highlight as the things you're most excited for in terms of events, in terms of things to look out for that Canadian cities and city practitioners who are tuning in should probably keep an eye out for?
Well, I mean, there's the theme days always start with a headline event, and so that's where we get usually the most attention on the leaders, if you will, in that area. So I would recommend watching for that one. And beyond that, I don't have any other specific ones to mention. Maybe you should be mentioning some to me, Jude, that you think I should specifically watch out for.
I do technically have one. I was going to save it till the end.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
Well, the Global Covenant of Mayors is hosting a panel that Shauna Sylvester will be participating on. We will have details posted in the chat soon for all of our audience members on that. I'm just counting on our tech team to grab those details and post it over there. But that's one thing that I'm definitely looking forward to tomorrow.
Okay, well, it's probably already in my agenda, Jude. It's just the way this COP goes. It's like I look at the next day's agenda around midnight.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And sometimes when you're in the blue zone, the agenda just sort of flows as the crowd goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, thank you so much, Ambassador Fuller, for joining us. It was a real pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, thank you, Jude. A real pleasure to speak to you, and my thanks to all of the cities out there who are making contributions on climate action and taking an interest in what's happening here at COP26 in Glasgow. It's really great to know that you're there, you're watching us, you're interested, and you're doing what you do in your own local communities.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody joining us at home. Of course, before we log off, for anybody who joined us in between, a reminder of a major story that's coming out of COP26 at where we are. The United States and China have issued a joint declaration. It's called the Glasgow Declaration, or I think that's the name they're giving it, where they're committing to work in the 2020s on a number of areas, including methane reductions, decarbonization, deforestation. So keep a lookout, all the city and climate practitioners who are excited for that. But otherwise, we'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same place. You at home or at the office, me right here, at 6:30 p.m. GMT, that is 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, for our last of these daily briefings live from COP26 in Glasgow. I can't believe it's already going to be 2 weeks, but we hope to see you again tomorrow. In the meantime, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and goodbye.